I'm going to start 2025 by covering a game that I don't think any of you would have expected me to ever play because of obvious reasons, especially if you know my feelings on anime and little girls. I find it very uncomfortable. I don't like it. I don't like the obsession with the little girls. And every single day, pretty much, of my existence, someone from my community sends me a gift game on Steam to annoy me. Something like Ratcatcher or Rat Smasher or some like look after your waifu game, all this kind of stuff. And also at the back of the meme, there are a bunch of people who really think that if I watch this next anime, that will get me hooked, that will get me in. And I've tried several of them over the years. It's not for me. So, how did we end up playing MiSide? So when I started into 2025, we were coming into New Year's Eve, and frankly, I didn't have time to jump into a massive project like we're going to be starting in the new year. So I was like, we can play anything we want. Let's do like what we call a one-day banger. And I'm looking through, and everyone's like, you should play MiSide. And I'm like, you're memeing on me, right? Everyone's joking at me, and I'm like, no, you're really going to like it. Like, I'm looking at it, and what I saw that tipped me a little bit was that the description of the game, despite its cutesy little, like, classic sort of like the anime video game thumbnail, was that it was psychological horror. And I was like, it's a horror game? They're like, yeah, it's a horror game. You should try this thing out. And we have had experience in the past with, like, the Doki Doki horror game I actually really enjoyed, because despite its veneer, it's got this, like, depth to it that actually made it very fun and very interesting. And I'm really happy to say MiSide has that in spades in a way that is almost unfair, that it's created by, like, two Russians who just had fun with this idea and almost, like, turned the whole obsession with the anime girl on its head. So I'm not going to spoil too much. Like, usually on TDP, I do a bit of a play-by-play of our journey through it. But I think because of the level of, like, interaction you have here, it's worth going into, like, the thoughts on the game and then not spoiling it for you, because this is a game that you kind of should play. Not just because you might be into this genre in itself, but because, like me, you might be averse to trying this game out just because of how it looks, right, on the face of it. What is the game? It plays with the idea of something that is becoming quite rampant across the world, especially like as the popularity of VTubers and things like that has skyrocketed in the last couple of years. It is the current big going trend. And as I record this, like an AI VTuber just broke the Twitch sub record by a long, long way that's ever been set. It was crazy. It plays with the idea of people getting apps, like potentially lonely guys, getting apps where they have a virtual girlfriend. And your job with this app, or the game of the app, is to just provide for this animated character. The animated character needs food, needs groceries. You will work to provide the money in order to buy her groceries, and then you will cook her meals for her, and all the time she's telling you how much she loves you, and blah, 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 and all this kind of stuff. And you decorate her house, and things like this, so it's got this sort of like Animal Crossing vibe to it. But that lasts, in this game, no more than like 5 minutes, before it just goes completely off the rails and is something entirely different. And the very premise of it is you are dragged into the game by Mita. Mita is the AI character, and Mita wants to spend time with you. She wants to meet you in real life, which at the beginning of the game, you're like, yeah, okay, this is kind of like the thread that tugs on these people in order to get them, like, invested into this character. But no, Mita literally transports you into her world. And you are now there, and she is there, and she wants you to stay. She doesn't want you to leave, because you're like, whoa. Hold on a minute. I'm in a game. I need to get the hell out of here, right? Like, reality very quickly sets in on you as the player and the player of the game. And one thing I very much enjoyed about this is, for the most part, this does sort of take a back seat because it would spoil the game, is the overarching mission is, of course, to get out of the game. Yet the player does accept certain... There's almost a conflict that, like, the player really does actually like Mita. Like, wants Mita. But there's a forgiveness going on that maybe you in the real world would be like, no, just get me the hell out of here. I'm going to burn this place to the world. Burn this place to the ground in order to get away from it. But what develops from there, and that's why I think it's worth this thoughts video, is an extremely well-crafted video game. is reminiscent of things like Superliminal, if you played that, with a lot of messing around with perspective, because you are in a video game virtual world, and that world, interestingly enough, has to obey certain rules. And those rules are based off the idea of game development. And so you can almost feel the people who made it, like, it's important that you understand how the game development process works in order to understand how you're transitioning and moving between these different areas, and the concept that every single person who has downloaded our app has a different meter, because that meter is like worked with their player in order to become who they are. So there's lots and lots, like almost an infinite number of meters. And what's more interesting than that from the game development standpoint is there are different versions of the app depending on when they updated it, from its alpha and beta versions of the app and the original meter to what maybe even was the original concept of the game, which then had to morph with the times because their original concept was kind of outdated, right? They might have had this like Ace Attorney idea of what this game was going to be. And we've seen this a million times. You've seen it with some of like your favorite apps in the world, right? Like Instagram, for example, was originally like a location check-in app. And that's what its goal was. That's what its vision was. And then it morphed and it changed and it turned into what we know as Instagram today. As games go through this as well. It's like the original concept art and vision is like, okay, we're going to make this sort of like 2D scrolling text adventure game, and it's like, well, they're kind of not doing well in the market these days, so maybe we need to make it 3D. Maybe we do need to look at like what Animal Crossing is doing and games like that and bring that in. And therefore the game has developed over these periods of time into what it eventually became with the latest version, which is what you're playing because you've only just downloaded it. But these other versions still exist. There are people who haven't updated the app. Within the code itself, the original stuff, the original assets, the original pieces of the puzzle are still lurking somewhere beneath the current version of the code. And you have to move between those in order to do it. So you get this entire universe. And it displays it in a very understandable, digestible way. And I thought this was really cool, like reshaping her apartment. You become very familiar with Mita's apartment because you're solving quite rudimentary puzzles, find certain things. But the puzzle solving itself is drawn, and there are, I can't even tell you how many mini games are in here which are drawn from lots of very popular games. It's very tongue-in-cheek. You can almost feel like this is a parody of like how easy it is to make a lot of the mobile games that exist these days. And the devs are almost like poking fun at that. It's like, yeah, like it's weird that, say, Angry Birds is ridiculously popular or was such a phenomenal runaway financial success because people were making Angry Birds and remaking that game in about 10 minutes. And they throw in a bunch of games, sometimes to solve a puzzle, sometimes just for fun. Like you might walk into a room that has an arcade machine and it's like, hey, here's another game that's for toilet gaming, right, where you're playing for like 5 or 6 minutes. This is actually a really fun experience, but you would never play this long term. But for the mobile game world, this totally works, and people would probably buy MTX, right? If you could see with a slightly flashier assets pack, this being Jetpack Joyride or Endless Runner or things like that, and they just throw them in as mini games because like this stuff isn't hard to make. This whole overarching idea of like utilizing all these elements, it almost gives me a Resident Evil Village vibe. If you remember Resident Evil Village is a really good game, but the way they made that is also kind of tongue-in-cheek, is that they just divided these antagonists into like 5 antagonists, I think it was the correct number, and each one of them has their own section of the game, which is very simply portioned out. You've got a town, and then you've got sort of a path that leads off to each of the antagonists' area. And each of those areas is simply a different genre of horror game. They're all in the horror sphere, but the way it plays out, you've got the haunted house, now you've got the more action-y one, and they're all just like, oh, I've played this game before. Like, if I go over here, it's Silent Hill. But if I go over here, it's like Resident Evil. If I go over here, it's like Phasmophobia. And it's all like, just, yeah, we'll just make that game within the game, and therefore we can't really go wrong. It's got that like broad appeal to it. It's because you'll definitely, if you like horror, you're definitely going to love one of these sections. You might like one less, but like you'll love this one because that probably reminds you very heavily, and it's done extremely well in a AAA fashion, of your favorite genre of horror game, and we'll do it even better, right? We'll have the jump scare area, we'll do all those kind of things. And that's what this reminded me of while I was playing it. And very quickly, I lost I lost that cloud that goes over me of like, oh, it's a silly anime, let's try and look up her skirt type game, which is still there. I do want to point that out. It's like, it's very rare, but they still do it because they ultimately fall back to remind you. And this is what I thought was so clever about the pacing of this game. It's going to take you maybe like 6 hours on one playthrough, but there's a ton of playthroughs to be had here with this game. Is that they still fall back on like, yeah, but this is probably why you picked the game up. And if you're like me, you like looked away. Like, this is not why I'm here at this point. I'm actually into different things. And it definitely moves through so many different environments that are just very well crafted video game stuff and doesn't leave you behind. I think there's a risk when you start getting very meta, which this is. It like breaks through a lot of the fourth wall heavily. Is that you could be like too over the top meta. It's like, oh, okay, that's kind of funny. Like, there's some very obvious ones like RTX on. At some point, like, they activated reflections within the app, and it's RTX on. That's what it is. And everyone's like, oh, RTX on. But it's a throwaway joke, which still leads you to very weird things, while simultaneously keeping you on your toes. For the horror aspect of it, I was made very uneasy by Meta and the different versions of Meta. I think they did this all the way until the very end of the game, where there are things that are going on that are not pushed in your face. You have to notice them, but they're done in a way that you probably will. And when you notice it, you're like, oh God, like, this is very creepy. Very, very creepy. And they do not keep it at all within the initial presentation of the game. From the very bright, cutesy 10-15 minutes, they play with that idea a lot to move it back. And they do draw on a lot of other elements. Like, it's all those little elements, like, they come from, like, PT and things like that, which some of you will know, but put it in their own way, where you're like, I get what we're doing here, but now we're going to do it in a different way. Which is the great way of iteration, right? Iteration is the spice of life. It's like, I like what you did there, but imagine if it worked like this, and then it can get real weird, right? Is one better than the other? That's hard to say. That's in the hands of the player. But we're going to have a go, and we're going to do it in a way so that very quickly, if you're a horror player, you'll be like, oh, I get what we're doing very quickly. And then you're like, oh, but actually, it's not quite what we're doing. It's close, but it's not quite what we're doing. Is this like PT, or is it like Station 8? What are we doing here? And then it morphs into its own new thing and then turns the creepiness level up. So I think it was well worth making. I recommend this game, and it's weird for me to say at the start of 2025, it's like the first game I'm recommending to you guys. I would give this like a high A in my rankings of a game worth playing, MiSide. It's very cheap. It's available on Steam. And yeah, I was pleasantly surprised by what I got here from the initial aversion due to the young girl anime style, where I'm like, ugh, I just don't like it in any way. And then it was like, oh, actually, like, put that to the side because it's going to get very, very weird. So I'm sorry. It's just those people who are like, what happened? Because on a personal note, while I was playing this, which was only for one day, having people come in sort of like 2 hours after we'd started and like, what happened? How is Mike playing an anime game? Because that is the thin veneer that this game presents itself as. And to then have everybody go, oh, okay, right, yeah, I see it. I see it. And then be very into it by the end of the day. I don't think you can give a higher praise to that when there are so many people who join me and my mindset of like, yeah, I'm not into that stuff. And they see it very quickly and they're like, nah, I don't know what's going on here. Is this like a bet, or is it a sub goal or something? And then like only within a few minutes being like, oh, okay. Oh, weird. So if you're looking for a little bit of something to spice up your horror life, this is by no means a new game. But if you've seen the thumbnail and gone, yeah, I get it. Okay, she's probably going to be a ghost or blah, 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 which is what I thought. Oh, it's going to be like a bunch of outfit changes, which again are in the game, but absolutely not relevant to what's going on. MiSide, check it out. I think it's a solid game. Well played. A high A from me. Not quite S tier, but very high A.